The invincible warrior arrives. The night sky was torn apart by fire. A massive ship, black as the void, hovered above the ruined city. It was silent, like a predator watching its prey. The streets below were filled with fear. People ran. Soldiers took positions. But deep down, they all knew nothing could stop what was coming. And then she arrived. A tall figure stood in the middle of the battlefield. Her armor gleamed under the moonlight, made of a strange metal that seemed alive. Her eyes, glowing silver, scanned the area. She was not human. She was something else. Something stronger. Something unstoppable. Her name was Zyra, and she was here to conquer. The first attack. The humans wasted no time. Soldiers opened fire. Bullets rained down on her, but they were useless. The bullets hit her armor and fell to the ground like raindrops. A tank fired a missile straight at her. An explosion followed. Dust and smoke covered the battlefield. For a moment, there was silence. Then, Zyra walked out of the smoke, unharmed. She lifted her hand, and a strange energy pulsed from her palm. In an instant, the nearest building crumbled into dust. Cars flipped. Soldiers were thrown back like ragdolls. She was not fighting them. She was destroying them. Panic spread. Radios buzzed with desperate voices. Fall back. Fall back. But Zyra did not chase them. She was not here to hunt weaklings. She was here to send a message. Resistance is useless. The human who did not run. As she walked forward, scanning for any remaining threats, she saw a figure standing in front of her. A human. A soldier. Unlike the others, he did not run. He did not fire. He just stood there, gripping his rifle tightly. His uniform was dirty, his face covered in sweat and dust. His heartbeat was fast, but his eyes were steady. "Why do you fight?" Zyra asked, her voice calm yet cold. The soldier, Daniel Carter, looked at her, breathing heavily. Then he did something no human had ever done before. He smiled. "Because we don't give up," he said. Zyra tilted her head slightly. "Your weapons are useless. Your people are weak. You have no chance of survival." Daniel chuckled, wiping blood from his forehead. "Maybe, but that's what makes us human. We fight, even when we know we might lose." For the first time in her life, Zyra hesitated. The words made no sense. In her world, the weak were crushed. There was no honor in fighting a battle you could not win. So why did this human look at her with defiance instead of fear? Her delay lasted only a second. That was all Daniel needed. With a quick movement, he grabbed a grenade from his belt and threw it at her feet. Boom! The explosion sent dust and fire into the air. Smoke covered the battlefield. And when it cleared, Zyra was still standing. But Daniel was gone. The first doubt. She could have chased him. She could have destroyed everything in her path. But she did not. She stood there, staring at the spot where he had stood. The words echoed in her mind. "We fight, even when we know we might lose." A command rang in her earpiece. "Report. Has the resistance been eliminated?" Zyra took a breath. Then, for the first time, she hesitated before answering. "Negative. Some survived." The voice on the other end was sharp. "Eliminate them. No mercy." Her fingers curled into a fist. Her mission was clear, but for the first time in her life, she was not sure if she wanted to follow it. The battle was over, but something had changed. As the alien ship hovered above, waiting for her next move, Zyra turned her eyes back to the battlefield. The city was burning. The humans were broken. They had lost this fight. But somehow, in the eyes of that one soldier, Zyra had seen something else. Something she did not understand. Something that made her hesitate. And that hesitation could change everything. The unthinkable choice. The sky above was dark, the air thick with the smell of burning metal and ash. Smoke curled around the ruined buildings like the breath of a dying beast. The battle was over. The city was in ruins. The humans had lost. And yet, Zyra hesitated. She stood in the middle of the battlefield, her silver eyes scanning the wreckage. The alien warship hovered above, its presence a reminder that she was not alone. Her people were watching. They were waiting for her to finish the mission. Her earpiece crackled again. The voice of her superior, Commander Vekros, was sharp and demanding. "Zyra, report. Have the remaining humans been eliminated?" Her fingers twitched. Her orders were clear. No survivors. She had followed these commands countless times before, on countless planets. Entire civilizations had crumbled before her. And yet, this time, something was different. Her mind drifted back to the soldier, Daniel Carter. The way he had stood his ground. The way he had smiled in the face of death. And most of all, the words that had struck something deep inside her. "We fight, even when we know we might lose." Why? Her kind, the Vorak, did not fight battles they could not win. They crushed the weak. They dominated. They conquered. Victory was all that mattered. But humans were different. They fought even when they knew it was hopeless. They refused to bow. And Zyra could not understand why. She took a slow breath, her armor shifting as she clenched her fists. Commander Vekros' voice cut through her thoughts, more demanding this time. "Zyra, respond. The survivors must be eliminated. That is an order." Her silver eyes flickered toward the ruins. She could hear them. Humans, hiding. Their breath was ragged, their bodies trembling. They thought she could not see them. A woman, clutching a child to her chest. An injured soldier, his leg twisted unnaturally. An old man, whispering prayers to a god who would not answer. Weaklings. She had destroyed thousands like them before. It was what she was made for. So why was she hesitating? Her hand tightened around the energy blade at her side. With one command, she could wipe them out. It would take seconds. But the words of the human soldier echoed in her mind again. "We fight, even when we know we might lose." She exhaled slowly. And then, she made a choice that would change everything. She turned off her communicator. A traitor in the ranks. Silence. For the first time in her life, Zyra ignored an order. The voice of her commander disappeared into nothingness. The battlefield was still, and for a moment, she simply stood there, unsure of what she had just done. Then she moved. With slow, measured steps, she turned away from the ruins, away from the defenseless humans she had been ordered to kill. Her ship was waiting in the distance. She would return. She would tell them the job was done. Perhaps, for the first time, she would lie. But before she could take another step, a sound. A gun being cocked. She froze. Behind her, standing among the rubble, was Daniel Carter. Blood ran down his face, his uniform torn, his breath heavy. But the fire in his eyes was still there. He was alive, and he was aiming a rifle straight at her. "Don't move," he said. Zyra slowly turned to face him, her expression unreadable. She could kill him in an instant. She didn't even need a weapon. A single move, and he would be dead before he could blink. But she didn't move. Daniel's hands trembled, but his voice was firm. "You hesitated." Her silver eyes flickered. "Why?" He pressed. "You had the chance to kill me, to kill all of us, but you didn't. Why?" Zyra was silent. She did not know the answer, and that terrified her. Daniel took a cautious step forward. "You're not like them, are you?" Zyra's jaw tightened. "You don't know anything about me, human." Daniel smirked. "Maybe not, but I know you didn't follow your orders." He tilted his head. "And I know that means you're in trouble." Zyra's fists clenched at her sides. He was right. If the Vorak discovered her betrayal, she would not just be hunted. She would be executed. For the first time in her life, Zyra, the unstoppable warrior, the perfect soldier, the conqueror of worlds, was the one being hunted. Daniel lowered his weapon slightly. "I don't know why you spared those people. But if you really don't want to be like them," He extended a hand. "Help us." Zira stared at the offered hand. She was Vorak, a warrior, a destroyer. She did not help the weak. And yet, she reached out. Her fingers brushed his. A single touch, a moment of hesitation. And in that moment, Zira made her choice. She was no longer just a warrior. She was something else, something new. And nothing would ever be the same again. The hunter becomes the hunted. The Vorak did not tolerate failure. They did not tolerate disobedience. And they never tolerated betrayal. Zira had once stood among the strongest warriors of her kind. She had led planetary conquests, destroyed entire civilizations, and had never questioned a single order. Until now. Now she was running. The night air was thick with the sound of alarms. Red lights flashed across the towering structures of the Vorak warship hovering above Earth. The sky trembled as fighter drones spread out like a swarm of metal locusts, scanning the ruins below. They were searching for her, the mark of a traitor. Zira moved quickly through the wreckage of the battlefield, her body tense. She had spent years hunting rebels, traitors, and resistance fighters across the galaxy. She knew how they thought, how they hid. But now she was the one being hunted. Her communicator crackled to life, but it was not Vecro's voice this time. "Zira, you are in violation of direct orders." She recognized the voice instantly. Admiral Korin, one of the highest-ranking officers in the Vorak fleet. "You have 60 seconds to surrender." Korin's voice was calm, emotionless. "Or you will be marked as an enemy of the Vorak Empire. You know what that means." Zira exhaled slowly. She knew exactly what that meant. It meant she would no longer be seen as a warrior, no longer be seen as one of them. It meant there would be no trial, no mercy. She would be hunted, captured, and erased, as if she had never existed. Her fingers hovered over the communicator. Surrender. She had never considered it before. Even now, her instincts screamed at her to return, to obey, to prove her loyalty. But something inside her had changed. Something had shifted. Her eyes flickered toward the human standing beside her. Daniel Carter. He had no armor, no advanced weapons, no reinforcements. He was injured, bleeding, exhausted. And yet, he had stayed behind. He had trusted her. She thought about the people she had spared. The mother, the injured soldier, the old man whispering prayers. Zira made her decision. She ripped the communicator from her armor and crushed it in her fist. There would be no surrender. She was done taking orders. A desperate escape. Daniel watched her, his breathing heavy. "Well," he muttered, "I guess that means we're in this together now." Zira didn't respond. She was already scanning the sky. The Vorak drones were getting closer. The warship above was preparing something. She could feel the hum of energy building in the air. "They're going to level this place," she said. "We need to move. Now." Daniel tightened his grip on his rifle. "Where exactly do you expect us to go? Because last time I checked, I don't have a spaceship parked around the corner." Zira turned to him, her silver eyes sharp. "I do." Daniel blinked. "You have a ship. A small recon vessel. If we reach it before they lock onto my signal, we have a chance to escape. And if they do lock onto your signal..." Zira didn't answer. She didn't need to. They both knew what would happen. Without another word, they started moving. The Vorak's deadliest hunter. But they were already too late. The air suddenly turned cold. A presence filled the battlefield, something dark and powerful. Zira stopped, every muscle in her body tensing. Daniel saw the change in her immediately. "What?" he asked. "What is it?" Zira didn't answer. She was staring at the sky. A shape was descending from the Vorak warship above. Not a drone, not a squadron. A single figure, clad in black armor, taller than Zira, moving with an unnatural stillness. The air around him shimmered like heat waves, bending and distorting. Daniel didn't need to be told. He could feel the danger radiating off this new arrival. "Let me guess," he muttered. "Not one of the friendly ones." Zara's voice was quiet, almost distant. "No, he is not." Daniel glanced at her. For the first time since meeting her, he saw something in her expression that he had never expected to see. Fear, the shadow of death. The figure touched the ground with eerie silence. Then he took a step forward. "Zara," he said, his voice smooth, controlled. "You should have known this day would come." Zara clenched her jaw. Vekros, Commander Vekros, the Vorak's greatest hunter, the one who had trained Zyra himself, and now, the one sent to kill her. Vekros tilted his head slightly, as if studying her. "I never expected this from you," he admitted. "You were one of my finest warriors, efficient, loyal, ruthless." His silver eyes narrowed. "But now, you stand beside a human." His gaze flickered toward Daniel, filled with disgust. "This is what you betrayed your people for." Vekros took a step closer. "A species that will be extinct within days." Daniel tightened his grip on his rifle. "I'm standing right here, buddy." Vekros didn't even look at him. "You have disappointed me, Zyra," he continued. "But it is not too late. Return with me. Swear your loyalty again, and your betrayal will be forgotten." Zyra's fists tightened. "I do not serve the Vorak anymore." Vekros sighed. A pity. Then he moved. Faster than a shadow. Faster than thought. 1 second he was standing still. The next, he was in front of them. Zyra barely had time to react before his fist slammed into her chest, sending her crashing through a half-destroyed building. Daniel turned, raising his rifle, and Vekros grabbed him by the throat. Daniel choked, his feet leaving the ground. Vekros lifted him effortlessly, staring into his eyes. "You are nothing," he said coldly. "A weak, fragile thing. Do you truly believe you matter?" Daniel gasped, struggling. He could feel his vision going dark. His lungs screamed for air. Then, a pulse of energy. A shockwave tore through the battlefield as Zyra launched herself back into the fight. Her blade sliced through the air. Vekros released Daniel just in time to dodge, the weapon cutting through empty space. He landed a few feet away, smiling slightly. "Good," he murmured. "Show me if you are still worthy of being called a warrior." Zyra stepped between him and Daniel, her blade glowing. "No," she said. "I am something else now." The battle had begun. The impossible alliance. The battle raged on, but it was a battle that neither of them was prepared for. Zyra, once the unyielding force of destruction, now found herself fighting for survival, against someone she had once trusted, against Vekros. Her body ached, the sharp sting of pain shooting through her muscles with every movement. But her silver eyes remained unwavering, focused. This fight was no longer just about her. It was about something bigger. It was about choosing a side. The moment of truth. Zyra's energy blade crackled to life as she held it tightly in her hand, her knuckles white from the force. She had never been more afraid in her life. Not when she had led armies to victory. Not when she had seen worlds burned beneath her feet. Now fear gripped her like a vice, and it had nothing to do with her physical strength. It had everything to do with what she was becoming. Vekros was already moving again, faster than she could react. His own weapon, a dark energy spear, glowing menacingly in the night. He swung it with deadly precision, and Zyra barely managed to deflect the blow, the sheer force of it knocking her backward into the remains of a broken wall. "You were once my finest pupil, Zyra." His voice was cold, full of disdain. He raised his spear again. "But now, you are nothing." Zyra stood tall, blood dripping from her side, her expression hardening with determination. "I'm not your pupil anymore, Vekros." Her gaze flickered toward Daniel, still recovering from the blow he'd taken earlier. He was standing, barely, but his resolve had not faltered. He was fighting, even though he was outmatched. It was almost as if he were determined to prove to her that he could fight beside her. Not because he was forced to, but because he chose to. It was that same human stubbornness that had made her hesitate on the battlefield. The same stubbornness that had made her reconsider everything. And now, as she faced Vecros, one of the greatest warriors the Vorak had ever known, she knew she couldn't fight him alone. Zera took a step back, her mind racing. Her breath was heavy, but her mind was clearer than ever before. The humans, as weak as they were, had something that even the Vorak could never understand. The ability to fight for something greater than themselves. Daniel had trusted her. Now, it was her turn to trust him. An unexpected pact. The air hummed as Zera raised her blade, and Vecros lunged. She barely had time to react before he slammed into her again, knocking the energy blade from her hand. The force of his attack sent her sprawling, the ground beneath her cracking as if the very earth was shaking from the fury of the battle. Daniel, though weakened, saw the opening. He grabbed a discarded weapon from the wreckage, a strange human gun, and fired. The shot was a perfect hit, hitting Vecros' shoulder. But Vecros barely flinched. "Is that all you've got?" Vecros sneered, his eyes burning with fury. He turned to face Daniel, his expression twisted in contempt. But as he stepped forward, he stumbled. Not from the bullet wound. Not from anything physical. He was distracted. For the first time in years, Vecros felt the weight of doubt. His expression faltered. Zera stood, wiping the blood from her lip, eyes locked onto Vecros. She had done it. She had disrupted his focus. "You don't have to do this, Vecros." Her voice was calm, steady, something that was completely unlike the warrior she had been just days ago. "You don't have to fight for them. For the Empire." Vecros' laugh was bitter, hollow. "You're wrong. It is too late for that. You betrayed us. And now, you will die with these weaklings." Zera stepped forward, her silver eyes cold and unforgiving. "No, you are the one who has betrayed us, Vecros. You follow a dying cause. You have become a slave to an empire that will fall. I have seen it, and so have you." The words hung in the air, heavy, as Vecros hesitated. He glared at Zera, his eyes burning with anger and disbelief. But there was something else in them now, a flicker of uncertainty. He took a step back, the shadow of doubt cast over him, and for the first time in his life, he questioned the path he had chosen. "You don't understand," he growled, shaking his head as if to rid himself of the thoughts. "You are weak. You will never survive without the Vorak. You can never fight alone." Zera's hand clenched around a broken piece of debris, anything to show him that she was not weak. "I've never fought alone, Vecros. I've never been alone." The words seemed to hit harder than any weapon could. Vecros flinched, his gaze darting between Zera and Daniel. The realization was there. The truth. It had always been there, but it had taken someone else to make him see it. Daniel stepped forward, the human rifle in his hand now strangely symbolic. He stood beside Zera, silent but resolute. "We don't need the Empire," he said, his voice low but strong. "We fight for each other. We fight for the people who don't have anyone else. We fight because we believe in something greater than ourselves." Zera looked at him, her heart racing, not from the battle, but from the intensity of the moment. She had seen the human capacity for hope, for strength, for belief. She had seen what he was willing to give up for the greater good. And for the first time, she understood. The moment of unity. Vecros' spear lowered slightly, his hands trembling. "Do you think you can change me, Zera?" He sneered, though his words lacked the conviction they once held. "The Vorak are the future. We are the superior race. Your weakness will be your downfall." Zera shook her head. "The future isn't just about strength, Vecros. It's about purpose, and you've lost yours." Vecros' eyes flickered one last time, but instead of the cold, brutal warrior he had been, he was something else. He was a broken man, a man trapped in his own convictions who had failed to see that the universe was changing. Before he could say another word, Zyra made her decision. She lunged forward, using the last of her strength to bring him down. Not with violence, not with destruction, but with the truth that had been buried in her heart for so long. Vecros fell to his knees, his spear slipping from his grasp as he stared into the cold eyes of a warrior who had chosen a different path. And for the first time, Zyra did not raise her blade to kill. She offered him a chance. "Join us, Vecros." For the first time, the once great warrior looked at her, not with anger, but with something close to admiration. And in that moment, the impossible alliance was formed. The cost of rebellion. The silence that followed was heavier than any battle. The wind carried the distant echoes of destruction, fires still burning in the remains of the city. Smoke curled into the night sky like the last breath of a dying world. Zyra stood over Vecros, her chest rising and falling, her muscles tense. She had expected him to fight until the bitter end, to die before surrendering. But he hadn't. For the first time, Vecros hesitated, and that hesitation had changed everything. A betrayal within the ranks. Vecros remained on his knees, his gaze locked onto the broken battlefield around him. Zyra could see it now, the cracks in his conviction. He had never doubted his orders before, never questioned the Vorak. But now, he had seen something he couldn't ignore. He had seen Zyra make a choice, and perhaps for the first time in his life, he wondered if he had been fighting for the wrong cause all along. Daniel tightened his grip on his rifle. "So what now?" His voice was cautious, ready for another fight. "Is he with us or against us?" Zyra turned to Vecros, her silver eyes unreadable. "That's up to him." The Vorak warrior exhaled slowly, pressing a hand against his side where the battle had left its mark. "The Vorak do not forgive betrayal," he said finally, his voice quieter than before. Zyra nodded. "Neither do humans." Daniel scoffed. "Yeah, but we do believe in second chances." Vecros looked between them, his expression unreadable. But then, a sudden explosion tore through the night. The ground shook violently as a shockwave erupted from the sky, sending Daniel stumbling back and Zyra shielding her eyes. Something was coming, or rather someone. From above, the Vorak warship loomed closer, and for the first time, Zyra could feel the sheer force of its presence. It wasn't just hovering anymore. It was preparing to strike. "They found us," Zyra muttered. A deep, robotic voice echoed through the air, booming from the warship's loudspeakers. "Commandeer Vekros. UAAVAFAILED to eliminate the traitor. UAAV1 adfinal CJNC to prove your loyalty." Zyra's blood ran cold. She knew what that meant. This wasn't just about hunting her anymore. The Vorak were going to wipe out the entire city. The impossible decision. Vecros stood, his gaze hardening. "They have given the kill order," he said grimly. Zyra clenched her jaw. "Then we have to stop them." Daniel glanced between the two Vorak warriors. "I hate to break it to you, but we're outnumbered, outgunned, and seriously outmatched. How exactly do you plan to fight a ship that size?" Zyra was already moving, scanning the battlefield, searching for anything they could use. "My recon ship is still operational. It has a cloaking system. If we can get inside the Vorak warship." Daniel's eyes widened. "You're talking about infiltrating a fully armed warship." Zyra nodded. "It's the only way." Vecros studied her carefully. "And what exactly do you plan to do once we're inside?" Zyra's expression darkened. "We destroy it." Daniel exhaled sharply. "Oh, sure. No big deal. Just destroy an alien warship. Totally normal Tuesday." But even as he said it, Zyra could see something shift in his stance. The fire in his eyes. The determination. Because despite the odds, despite everything against them, Daniel Carter was still ready to fight. Just like a human. Vecros, however, remained still. He stared up at the sky, at the warship that had once been his home. He was Vorak. He had served the Empire his whole life. He had believed in its power. And now it was ready to destroy him. "Vekros," Zyra said firmly. "You know the Vorak better than anyone. You know their weaknesses. We need you." The Vorak warrior didn't respond immediately. His hands curled into fists. The weight of his past, his loyalty, his entire identity, it was all being tested right here, right now. Then finally, he made his choice. Vekros turned to them, his eyes cold but resolved. "Then let's end this." The mission begins. The Vorak warship began its descent, massive cannons humming to life as its targeting systems locked onto the ruins below. The countdown had begun. Zyra led the way, sprinting across the battlefield toward the hidden recon ship, Daniel and Vekros following close behind. The moment they reached it, Zyra activated the ship's controls, the sleek black craft coming to life beneath her fingers. "Strap in," she ordered. "This is going to be rough." Daniel groaned, strapping himself into the nearest seat. "Why do I feel like you enjoy saying that?" Vekros remained silent, gripping the side of the ship as Zyra launched them into the sky. Immediately, warning sirens blared. They were detected. The Vorak warship's defense systems locked onto them, cannons swiveling into position. The sky became a storm of laser fire, bright streaks of destruction cutting through the darkness. Zyra's hands moved with practiced precision, twisting the ship into impossible maneuvers, barely dodging the onslaught. Daniel gritted his teeth. "Remind me never to fly with you again." "Noted," Zyra muttered. "Hold on." The ship's cloaking system engaged just as a plasma blast narrowly missed them, the explosion rattling through the hull. For a brief moment, everything went still. They were invisible now. The Vorak scanners couldn't track them. But it wouldn't last long. Vekros leaned forward. "We have one chance to infiltrate. Once inside, we need to disable the core reactor. If we fail..." He didn't need to finish the sentence. They all knew what failure meant. Zyra took a deep breath. This was it. The point of no return. She looked at Daniel. "Still think humans don't stand a chance?" Daniel smirked. "I don't know. We're about to take down an alien warship with a handful of people and a stolen ship." He glanced at Vekros. "And you know, a guy who tried to kill us 5 minutes ago." Vekros remained expressionless. "You are not making me regret my decision." Zyra smirked. "That's the human way." With a sharp movement, she pushed the ship forward, steering them straight toward the warship's docking bay. The final battle had begun. The final battle begins. The Vorak warship loomed over the burning city like a god preparing to unleash its final judgment. Its cannons, glowing with raw energy, were primed to fire. Inside the stolen reconnaissance vessel, Zyra, Daniel, and Vekros sat in silence, each of them preparing for what would come next. The cloaking system held for now, keeping them invisible to enemy scanners, but the moment they breached the warship's hangar, all hell would break loose. This was their last chance. Zyra's fingers tightened around the ship's controls. She was no longer just a Vorak warrior, no longer a mindless weapon of destruction. She was something else now, and she had made her choice. The Vorak Empire had taught her that only the strong survived. That mercy was weakness. That loyalty was absolute. But now she understood the truth. Strength wasn't about destruction. It was about choosing what to protect. And tonight, she would prove it, breaking into the warship. Zyra maneuvered the ship toward the warship's docking bay. Vekros stood behind her, his gaze fixed on the enemy vessel. "Security will be tight," he said. "They won't expect an infiltration, but the moment they detect us, every Vorak warrior on board will mobilize." Daniel exhaled sharply. "So, sneak in quietly, then blow everything up." Zyra smirked. "That's the plan." Vekros remained unreadable. "Your plans are reckless." "Yeah," Daniel grinned. "Welcome to the human way." With a final push, Zyra guided their ship into the docking bay. The moment the landing gear engaged, alarms blared. They had been detected. "Move," Zyra shouted. The hangar doors hissed open, and they sprinted out, weapons drawn. The hangar was vast, lined with Vorak fighters, towering supply crates, and maintenance drones that immediately scurried away in fear. Then came the soldiers. The first wave of Vorak warriors stormed into the hangar, their energy weapons primed and ready. They wore the same armor Zyra once wore, the same insignia she once fought under. But now, they were her enemies. And she would not hesitate. With a flick of her wrist, Zyra's energy blade ignited. She moved like a shadow, faster than the enemy could react, cutting through them with ruthless precision. Daniel, staying behind cover, fired shot after shot, taking down enemies with expert aim. "How many of these guys are there?" he shouted. Vekros stepped forward, his own spear slicing through enemy ranks. "More than you can count." They pushed forward, clearing a path through the hangar. But the real challenge still awaited them. They had to reach the reactor core, the heart of the warship. Zyra led the way through the narrow corridors of the ship, the walls pulsing with the hum of alien technology. Vekros moved beside her, his face unreadable. He had once belonged here, commanded respect among these warriors. Now he was a traitor. Daniel followed close, gripping his weapon tightly. How far to the reactor? Vekros didn't hesitate, one level down. But the path will be heavily guarded. Zyra exhaled. Then we fight. They pushed forward, dodging security drones and cutting down soldiers who tried to block their way. The deeper they went, the more resistance they faced. Then, an explosion rocked the ship. Zyra stumbled, catching herself against the wall. The emergency sirens wailed louder, red lights flashing along the corridors. Vekros cursed under his breath. They've begun the firing sequence. Daniel's face paled. You mean they wiped the whole city out thing? Zyra's jaw clenched. They were running out of time. They reached the reactor chamber, a massive room filled with glowing energy conduits, pulsing with raw power. The core was encased in a transparent containment field, humming with enough energy to power an entire fleet. Vekros pointed toward the control panel across the room. We need to override the safeties, shut it down before it fires. Daniel moved first, sprinting toward the controls. And then the doors slammed shut behind them. A deep, familiar voice echoed through the chamber. You should have surrendered, Zyra. Vekros stiffened. Zyra turned slowly. And there, standing at the far end of the chamber, was Admiral Korin. He was taller than Vekros, broader, his dark armor gleaming in the red emergency lights. His silver eyes burned with fury. You betrayed your people, Korin said, stepping forward. You sided with the weak. And for what? To die alongside them. Zyra raised her blade. No, she said. To stop you. Korin smirked. Then die trying. He moved faster than Zyra anticipated, his energy staff slicing through the air like a blur. The final battle had begun. The last stand. Zyra barely dodged the first strike, twisting her body as Korin's weapon nearly took her head off. She countered with a precise slash, but Korin blocked it effortlessly. Vekros lunged next, his spear clashing against Korin's. Sparks flew as the two Vorak warriors battled with deadly precision. Daniel, meanwhile, scrambled toward the control panel. His hands moved over the alien interface, desperately trying to shut down the reactor. Guys, any second now would be great. Zyra fought harder than she ever had before. Korin was powerful, more than any enemy she had ever faced. But she wasn't fighting alone. Vekros fought beside her, not as a commander, not as an enemy, but as an equal. Blow after blow, they'd matched Korin's attacks, forcing him back. But the Admiral was relentless. Then, Korin struck. His blade slashed across Vekros' side, sending him crashing to the ground. Zyra's eyes widened as her former mentor groaned in pain. For a split second, she hesitated. And that was all Korin needed. With brutal force, He slammed his weapon into Zira's chest, sending her flying backward. She hit the ground hard, pain exploding through her ribs. Corin loomed over her, his weapon raised for the final blow. "You were never strong enough, Zira." Zira coughed, blood trickling from her lips. "You're wrong." She looked past Corin, toward the control panel. Daniel had done it. A deep rumble filled the chamber as the reactor overloaded. The energy containment field flickered wildly, unstable. The warship was going to explode. Corin realized too late. His eyes widened in shock. Zira struck. With the last of her strength, she drove her blade through Corin's chest. The Admiral gasped, his body convulsing, then collapsed. Vecros pushed himself to his feet, staring at Zira. "We need to leave. Now." Daniel sprinted from the controls, his face pale. "No argument here." They ran. Explosions tore through the ship as they raced back to their vessel. Flames erupted around them, debris crashing from above. The moment they reached the hangar, Zira threw herself into the pilot's seat. The engines roared to life. "Hang on." The ship blasted out of the warship just as the entire vessel detonated in a massive fireball. They had won. But at what cost? The warrior's heart. The explosion split the night sky apart like a second sun. The Vorak warship, once an unbreakable symbol of power, was now nothing but burning wreckage, its shattered remains falling from the heavens like dying embers. From the cockpit of their stolen reconnaissance vessel, Zira gripped the controls with steady hands, guiding them away from the destruction. They had won. But victory had never felt so heavy. The aftermath of war. As the fires raged below, the city lay in ruins. The war had taken its toll, leaving behind crumbling buildings, shattered streets, and a silence that spoke louder than any battlefield. Zira, Daniel, and Vecros sat in the ship's dimly lit cabin, the hum of the engines the only sound between them. None of them spoke. What was there to say? They had stopped the Vorak. They had destroyed the warship. The city was safe, for now. But the cost. Zira looked down at her hands, still stained with the remnants of battle. How many had died today? How many had she killed before she had chosen this path? The weight of it settled in her chest like an iron chain. Daniel, sitting across from her, finally broke the silence. "So, what now?" His voice was quiet, almost hesitant. He had spent so much time fighting to survive, running, resisting. Now, the war, at least this part of it, was over. What came next? Zira's silver eyes flickered to Vecros, who sat stiffly against the cabin wall, his wound hastily bandaged. He had once been her superior, her mentor, the embodiment of Vorak power. Now he was in exile, just like her. And yet he had fought alongside her. Zira exhaled, the weight of her decisions pressing down on her. "The Vorak won't stop," she said finally. "They will return. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but they will come back." Daniel rubbed the back of his neck. "And when they do?" Zira looked out the cockpit window at the world below, a broken world, a world that had fought back. "Then we'll be ready." The turning point. Hours passed before they landed. They chose a desolate stretch of land outside the city, where the air was thick with the scent of smoke, and the sky was still dark from the fires burning in the distance. As they stepped out of the ship, Zira felt the weight of the past pressing down on her. The Vorak had shaped her into a weapon, had forged her into something unbreakable. But here now, she had chosen something else. She had chosen to protect. Vecros stood beside her, his gaze locked on the ruined city ahead. "You know what this means, don't you?" he murmured. Zira nodded. "We can never go back." The Vorak would see them as traitors. There was no redemption, no forgiveness for what they had done. Vecros exhaled sharply. "Then where does that leave us?" Zira turned to him, her silver eyes unwavering. "We fight," she said. "Not for them. Not for the Vorak, but for something bigger." Daniel crossed his arms, studying her carefully. You're talking about rebellion, aren't you? Zera didn't blink. I'm talking about freedom. Daniel let out a breath, shaking his head with a smirk. And here I thought I'd seen everything. Vecros, for the first time since they had fled the warship, allowed a small, almost imperceptible smile to cross his face. Then we will need an army. Zera looked toward the city, toward the survivors, toward the people who had lost everything and still stood. Humans. Weak, fragile, defiant. And perhaps the galaxy's greatest hope. She turned back to them, her jaw set. Then let's build one. The beginning of something greater. The days that followed were filled with rebuilding, not just of the city, but of something far greater. Zera, Daniel, and Vecros traveled through the ruins, speaking to survivors, to soldiers who had fought and lost, to those who had nothing left but hope. And one by one, they began to believe. The Vorak had ruled through fear. They had crushed countless civilizations beneath their might. But now, they had been defied. Word spread quickly. The story of the Vorak warrior who had turned against her own kind. The human who had stood against an empire. The battle that had destroyed a warship. A resistance was forming. Not just here, everywhere. And Zera knew this was just the beginning. She stood on a ridge overlooking the city, the night wind brushing against her face. The stars above stretched endlessly, and somewhere out there, the Vorak still reigned. But not for long. Daniel stepped beside her, hands in his pockets. You ever think about what's next? Zera's silver eyes glowed faintly in the darkness, all the time. Daniel nodded, staring up at the sky. You know, when this all started, I thought we were just fighting to survive. Now, it feels bigger than that. Zera smirked. Because it is. He turned to face her. So, what's our next move, fearless leader? Zera glanced at him, then at Vecros, who stood nearby, arms crossed. An unlikely alliance. A new beginning. She turned back to the stars. We find others like us, she said. We build an army. And then, her voice was calm, steady. We take the war to them. Epilogue. The Vorak's next move. Deep in the Vorak homeworld, a council of warlords gathered. The news of the destroyed warship had spread across the empire like wildfire. A single warrior had defied them. A single city had resisted their might. And now rebellion was brewing. A towering figure sat upon the high throne, his dark armor glinting beneath the cold light of the chamber. His glowing red eyes flickered with interest as he listened to the reports. So, Zera has turned against us, the figure mused, his voice smooth and calculating. A general bowed before him. Yes, Lord Prime. She has sided with the humans. She has declared war. Lord Prime leaned forward, a slow smile curving across his lips. Then we shall respond in kind. His voice dropped to a whisper. Send the fleets.